As many of you have known from me in the past, I've made it no secret in my everlasting love of the British sci-fi series Doctor Who. And it's not hard to see why, really. Whether it be from the dignified and intriguing and slightly campy mysteries of the original series, or the fun, emotionally gripping, over-the-top modern series, or really just any of the media in between, such as the comics, the novels, the audio dramas, the animated movies, or anything else. There's a lot to love about Doctor Who, and one of the main ones being the villains. The adversaries of Doctor Who are some of the most sinister, unique and devastating that you would ever see in fiction, and I think it's high time that we look back at the best of them. Now, just to make things clear here, I'll primarily be focusing on the TV villains here, and while I know that some of the non-canon villains, such as the comic book and audio dramas ones, can be really great, I want to focus on the ones that most people will know about, the ones where their main form of exposure to the audience was through the TV. However, their future appearances in non-canon material will be mentioned here, especially since some of them start off as allies and then turn into great villains within the expanded material. But besides that doesn't mean we won't be looking at some of the non-canon material later on down the line anyway. Once again, I'd like to address as always that this is just solely my opinion. This is not legally endorsed by the BBC in any way as their official list of what they consider the greatest Doctor Who villains. If you want to disagree on this with me, then that's perfectly fine. I do not consider this a stone cold evaluation. I like to be challenged on my opinions, and I like to see what other people think. This is just me as a fan discussing what I think are some of the best of the Doctor Who villainy. But for those who wish to continue to know that, then grab your sonic screwdrivers and silly hats, and we partake in looking at some of the greatest show of antagonism in fictional history. This is the top 13 Doctor Who villains. Number 13, the Midnight Entity.
Now then, Sky. Are you Sky?
Let's start off with a mysterious, obscure and terrifying beast of a foe. Originally only seen so far on the series 4 episode Midnight, the fan-dubbed Midnight Entity is probably one of the most mysterious creatures to be featured in the modern series, to the point where we pretty much virtually know nothing more about it than when it left and the moment it arrived. And using its power of stealing voices, it managed to create an element of paranoia that is not normally seen in the modern series, and it probably came closest than any other villains of the series in killing the 10th Doctor, having the people it was manipulating to try and throw him out of the bus onto a planet of burning light. The great thing about the Midnight Entity was its mystery. Very few Doctor Who villains leave their motivations and reasoning completely unclear to both the audience and the characters. So on that regard, it also made a great job at generating fear, since there's nothing more frightening than something that is silent, unreasonable, and mysterious. So on that, it creates it and makes it wholly unique. The Midnight Entity did a fantastic job at creating fear, suspense and intrigue in its initial appearance, and it's a shame that it's been never used again. And while it can be argued that it can't, due to how it was considered the only one of its kind, it was killed by the end of the episode, given the retcons and plot devices that Doctor Who comes up with, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to pull another one out at some point. Which is why it gets the relatively low point on this list. That and because it was irritating how we didn't know anything about it. Although, as is, it was still actually a very well-made creature that had capabilities way beyond what you thought it was capable of. Number 12. The Gasmask Zombies.
Mummy?
The first of many Stephen Moffat penned villains on this list, so warning to those of you who are anti-Moffat. The Gasmask Zombies are equally infamous for being legitimately terrifying in their first and only appearance in Series 1 of the modern series. and creating a legitimately intriguing mystery and tying it together with a very tragic and brutal backstory. And their creation gave us the one, the only, and the awesome Captain Jack Harkness.
Barrowman!
The creatures themselves have all the telltale traits of zombies. Slow, lumbered movement and an eerie lack of dialogue, though with the exception of a particularly creepy one-liner.
Are you my mummy?
But, unlike real zombies, these creatures can make you turn from just a touch, and the process is a truly horrific sight to behold. Still gives me nightmares. The zombies were also a good way in that they kind of were a parallel to the Spanish flu epidemic that went on at the time the episode was set. And of course their introduction led to the statement that would define the Ninth Doctor.
Bananas are good.
Overall, while the resolutions of these creatures might have been a bit disappointing for some, the overall effect that they had in the majority of the episode was still pretty chilling. And the effect that they had on the show both in story and behind the scenes makes them very hard to keep off the list. Number 11. The Valiard.
Why waste your breath on that simple-minded oaf? You cannot speak as though reality is a one-dimensional concept.
One of the most classic and to this day psychologically probing villains of the Doctor, the Valiard is all the negative elements from the Doctor taken from somewhere between his 12th and 13th incarnation, as according to Rassilon, apparently the Doctor during his 13th incarnation was trying to experiment with breaking the 13th generation limit, and it resulted in the creation of the Valiard. Now, does that sound familiar to anybody? Well, it's not made clear if this incarnation is from the biological 13th or if it will be the one that will follow Capaldi. It is possible that we may see him again soon, but even if we don't, the idea of having the worst parts of yourself in a separate mind, Jekyll and Hyde style, and for him to turn out to be one of the worst people of all time. Hell, in one episode it's implied that he was Jack the Ripper. That's how much of an arsehole the Doctor could be. It's very poignant to the protagonist and creates a great psychological attack on them, as well as the physical ones that they pose as a villain in the first place. Making the Valiard a fantastic concept for a Doctor Who villain, and giving him an ability that the other villains within the Rogues Gallery couldn't even possibly live up to. It's just a shame though that he was never really used that often. And to be honest, he wasn't really used to his full potential, both as a concept and also in comparison to the other Time Lord villains. Though the effect that he had on the show, particularly when he toyed with the Sixth Doctor's mind in the fantastic multi-part story Trial of a Time Lord, where he even managed to outshine Brian Bloody Blessed's performance, does allow the Antithesis Doctor to make this list. I just wish he could make a reappearance again someday soon. I mean, it's not like the modern series has a lack of classic villains running around anyway, so just throw another one in there. And I'd personally love to see Capaldi's attack eyebrows go up against the Valiard's attack cheekbones. Number 10. The Sontarans.
We stare into the face of death!
One of the more one-note, but still very memorable and enjoyable villain forces in Doctor Who, the Sontarans are, by the 10th Doctor's opinion, the greatest soldiers in the galaxy. Unless you don't count the school of warmongering aliens advised by a renegade Time Lord that use humans as their own toy soldiers, or if you don't count the root and host that the Sontarans have been at war with for centuries. Yeah, I guess in that regard they are the best. Despite that though, they are actually a very strong military force, headstrong, surprisingly physically imposing, impressive strategies, and they're willing to die proudly in battle when they know it's their only option. And two individual Sontarans have gone on to be greatly developed characters, the popcorn-torturing comic relief of Commander Strax, and the surprisingly well-rounded and noble individual of Commander Carr, the self-proposed last Sontaran from the Sarah Jane Adventures. While I may sometimes blur the line of uneasy ally and an enemy to the Doctor, The amount of times he's had to face them and the itchingly close times they've come to defeating the Earth, sometimes even closer than some of the other more major military standing forces in Doctor Who, does make them an impressive villain force. And they make surprisingly good nurses. Just try and keep their comedy hijinks to a minimum in a regeneration episode, please. Number 9. The Trickster.
Femoral minds are so limited.
But George, the Trickster's not a real Doctor Who villain. That is technically true. But I will say that I feel that he's been in enough related Doctor Who material and has faced the Doctor enough times both directly and indirectly to be considered a true villain for him. For those who don't know, the Trickster was a reoccurring villain from the Doctor Who spin-off, The Sarah Jane Adventures. No prizes for guessing who that was about. That's right, Adric. Regardless, the idea of the Trickster was that he would alter time by removing certain people from it or by changing the course of history slightly that would cause massive ripples in the space-time continuum and result in huge amounts of chaos which he would then feed off of. He came into conflict with Sarah Jane twice on her own, one where he made her die in place of her friend when they were children, thus resulting in her not being there for when she was meant to destroy an asteroid bound for Earth, and the other time in where he made her parents not die when she was a baby, and thus allowing him to enter through a fault in the space-time continuum and continually destroy Earth for 50 years. If you haven't figured it out already, Doctor Who is a very bizarre show. His 2 appearances in the show were 2 of the best episodes in Sarah Jane Adventures, but he wasn't done there, and in the last time he appeared, The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, he did foresee his attack, but he was too late to get there in time to stop it. Which is both a rarity and rather ironic given the fact that he has a time machine. However, with her son Luke, his friends Ronnie and Clyde, and of course K9, he managed to defeat the Trickster supposedly once and for all, but we know all too well that one of his associates eventually messed around with Donna and her cardinal direction skills. The reason why I like the Trickster so much and the reason why I put him on this list is that I feel that he's the closest thing in this series that we have to the Devil besides this guy. But while the Beast of the Pit masterfully embodied the look and presence of the Devil, the Trickster masterfully portrayed the personality and the powers of one, being able to make people make choices that they eventually live to regret, and normally in situations that they can't say no to, making him a very surprisingly powerful villain force and also giving up some really great moments. Plus, he's got an awesome look, which actually is rather surprising given that he was born into a show where monster designs would often look like this. Overall, a fantastic villain. It's just a shame that he got the same treatment for his character that the Valeyard did. Number 8. Syl.
Why is everything no longer as it was?
Yet again one of the more obscure villains from the classic series. Syl is basically what happens if you took a tiny Jabba the Hutt and Mojo from the X-Men and put them together into a blender. Basically, the idea of him is that he's a sleazy, perverted, con artist businessman who often lies and cheats to get his own way. His first appearance was in the 6th Doctor story arc, The Vengeance of Davros, in where he was negotiating deals with the leaders of Davros who were facing economic turmoil, and he also lied to them about the value of Zyton 7, a mineral that was used to fuel time machines and was in a great abundance on Davros. And this is before the Time War, bear in mind. This is back in the day when there were Time Lords going around left, right and centre. So if the people of Davros knew that, then they would have never have had to rely on Syl. But the reason he did that was that he was basically trying to put them into a corner where they would be forced to allow him to sell videos of people being tortured in Davros' dungeon on the galactic market. Because they were already doing that on Davros in the first place and it was already doing quite popular. So Syl realised that they would make a massive mint out of it if they did it on the galactic market as well. Well, it's got to be better than some of the reality TV we have these days. The reason I like Syl is that he acts a very lurid and coarse villain element that we rarely see in Doctor Who, and given how diverse the universe is, it's rather surprising that we don't see many people as perverted and evil as him. But beyond that, he's just entertaining. He's gleefully perverted and demonstrated in how he treated Perry, not that I can really blame him to be honest, and has little regard for any life other than his own, and he later made an appearance in Trial of a Time Lord as well, which potentially revealed elements about the Sixth Doctor's natures that were previously unseen. In a world today where villain fare, not just in Doctor Who but in general, is rather typically bland and generic, still represents an element of villainy that I wish would come back these days, even if he does look like the creature from the Black Lagoon's abandoned test tube baby. Number 7. The Silence. One of Stephen Moffat's greatest strengths when it comes to writing villains and monsters is that he can create very ethereal, meta kind of villains that play with the audience's mind as much as the characters. And while admittedly the 11th Doctor's story arc of Silence Will Fall had its hit and miss moments, whether you love it or hate it, you have to admit that the backbone of the Order of the Silent, the Silence, were the best thing about it. The idea of the Silent is that they were genetically engineered priests of a galactic church, who, when they found that the Doctor's presence on a planet could potentially result in the end of the universe, they dedicated their existence to making sure that he would never make it there, and did so by manipulating human history through their special ability, in that when you look away from one, you completely forget that it was there. Much like a lecture in media debates, or any show on TLC. The Silence also provided a great element in that they also kind of had the element of the men in black suits thing that I also mentioned in my Roald Dahl list, in that they kind of act as the element of the government that is continuously trying to twist the human behaviour and the way that they can manipulate humans and try and twist them into their own goals. But unlike within The Witches, where it was still rather a one-note thing, this one is done in a lot more intense and a lot more complex way. Along with having one of the most creepy designs and just presence in the recent series of Doctor Who, the Silents are also one of the most popular, along with some that you may also see on this list later. And while their motivation is needlessly complex and hard to follow, much like many great villains, it's not why they do what they do, it's how they do it. Number 6. The Cybermen.
Hostile elements will be deleted.
One of the classics here, the Doctor and the Cybermen go together like bread and butter. Or maybe just toast and marmalade, given what the other bread and butter villain is. Regardless, the Cybermen first appeared in the first Doctor story arc, The 10th Planet, in where they came from Earth's twin planet that had ran out of natural fuel resources, though it had enough power to transport itself through space, I do not know, and they planned to use Earth to mine it for its own natural resources. However, the first Doctor and his companions beat them, but ever since then they've been making reappearances in almost every series of Doctor Who since then. And every time, with more power. In the series there have been two kinds of Cybermen, one from Mondas in our universe, and the ones that were made as an emotionless life support system by Owen from the Vicar of Dibley in an alternate universe, each one having very little differences in appearance, goal and methods. Both of them want to be able to convert everything within creation to be like themselves, invincible, powerful, and completely without emotion. The Cybermen are complete classics in the Whovian Rogues Gallery, and in a way present an interesting commentary on the inevitability of humanity, in that we can either strive to be more like ourselves but lose our humanity along the way, or accept our fate and know that in full knowledge that we will die one day. And of course, the Cybermen have been the centre of some fantastic plots against the Earth of humanity in general, whether it be through destroying the Earth by manipulating earthquakes, full-scale invasions, disguising themselves as ghosts to invade another dimension, resurrecting the dead, or ripping off the Borg. The Cybermen have always posed a massive threat to the Doctor ever since their first appearance, and they're definitely not going away sometime soon. And I guess in that regard, in comparison to us, you could say that they have more power. I know I've already done it once, but it's a cool line. Number 5. Solomon.
I like my possessions to have spirit. Means I can have fun breaking them.
One of the more or less remembered villains of the modern series, and I really can't think why. He's despicable, slimy, he gets away with some pretty dastardly things, he's in an episode where the title alone demands to be watched, and he's played by classic character actor David Bradley, who would go on to ironically play William Hartnell in the Adventures Through Time and Space special. How do people not remember this guy? For those who don't know, Solomon was really nothing more than just a pirate and a merchant, willing to make any deal or do anything for a sale. It's a simple premise for a villain really, but the great thing about him is how he does what he does. He's completely despicable and completely willing to destroy or kill anything that stands in his way of profit, including the entire crew of a SiIurian ship when he found out that they were transporting real dinosaurs, and then he was even willing to kill them when the Doctor stood in his way. And much like Sil, his very sick and perverted behaviour towards certain characters, particularly Nefertiti in this episode, made his tone even more despicable. Solomon is a perfect example of a villain that we need more of these days, motivated by very selfish and self-centered reasons, but the way he does it and the way he's portrayed makes him very compelling and interesting. Plus, he's performed masterfully, as Bradley's Filch-esque performance makes him a perfect casting choice. It's basically a shame that he's not really been featured ever since then, and his entire reason for existence was basically just to be made a footnote in the Name of the Doctor episode. However, on that note, his dispatchal within the episode has been a hotly debated element amongst the 11th Doctor ever since. Even so, with the element of the villains appearing in spin-off material before the Doctor meets them for the first time is very often used within their plots, I would definitely like to see Solomon return, though preferably without Mitchellbot and Webtron. Number 4. Okay, now before we move on, this next entry contains massive spoilers for the comic book story The Prisoners in Time. So for those of you who don't want to be spoiled, then skip ahead to this point here. For those of you who already know, or just don't care, then let's move on. Adam Mitchell.
Oh my god, I'm gonna be sick.
Now, in case you're new to Doctor Who, Adam was originally a one-time companion of the Ninth Doctor, who, after getting an infospike installed in his head in the 201st century, then tried to give information on the future back to his past self. The Doctor then found out, destroyed said information, and then abandoned him on Earth with a forehead that could be opened with the click of the fingers. Well, in the Prisoners of Time comic, it was revealed that he naturally wasn't very happy about that. And after his mother died of a brain aneurysm, which he could have potentially helped with all the future information that the Doctor deleted, he then dedicated his life to finding out everything he could about the Doctor, then travelled through time using a stolen vortex manipulator and kidnapped the Doctor's companions one by one, forcing the Doctor to make him feel how he felt when he abandoned him on Earth. While unfortunately Adam's whining nature lasted in his villain guise from his TV equivalent, his ambition and legitimate strategic and comprehensive planning made him out to be one of the most efficient and menacing of Doctor Who's human villains to date, and much like the Valiard, Adam is a perfect way to get the Doctor and on a psycho-personal level, forcing the Doctor to see himself in his darker and more harsher qualities. And also make him ponder if his nature of taking humans on board is really a gift or a torture to them post-travel. And while it is also explored in Torchwood and the Sarah Jane Adventures, Adam's extreme verbal beatdown of the Doctor takes it a level to none had previously explored. This, and also coupled with his unique character development that very few in Doctor Who have ever gone through, makes Adam not only one of the greatest villains of all time, but also one of the most unique characters in Doctor Who of all time. Yes, I seriously just said that. You may now feel free to start spamming my comment box. In any case, I still revere Adam as a great villain in many ways from his comic incarnation. If he would stop being such a whiny bitch about it! Number 3. The Weeping Angels. I think everyone saw this one coming at some point. And while admittedly the methodology and the way the biology of the Weeping Angels work has been a bit confusing and overcomplicated recently, I think it's still hard to deny that they're one of the most interesting, terrifying and unique Doctor Who villains as of late. For the three of you that don't know about them, the way the Angels, the ultimate Moffat meta-villain, work is that when you look at them, they turn completely into stone, unable to move in any way, But when you look away from them, they then, faster than you can ever imagine, touch you. And with that touch, they send you back in time, and they then feed off the energy that you would have had if you would have spent the rest of your life, of your intended life, in the present time. And that checks off my sanity list in that I was able to say that without going mad. Moving on. While their initial and later forms of methodology have been rather confusing and a little silly, the base element of their character and species, the element of taking advantage of the thing that we have to do as a species in mandatory, that being blink, makes them a truly intimidating foe, even more so with how their first appearance was against people who weren't the Doctor or any of his companions, in a Dr. Light episode as many people like to call it, who have to use their own wit and newly acquired knowledge to beat them, allowing us to be put into their shoes and be able to feel the fear that they're feeling, even more so to the point that during their first initial appearances, when a character wasn't looking at an angel, but a camera was, they still wouldn't move, they would still stay in stone, again allowing it to be played into the audience's mind once again. And while admittedly it is slightly controversial that in Flesh and Stone they did move briefly, and it is distracting about how obviously CG'd it is, I still can't deny that it is still really creepy to look at, especially given the context of the scene that they do it in. Many people gush over the Angels, claiming that they're the greatest villains that Doctor Who has ever seen, possibly of all time, and admittedly it's hard to deny their opinions. However, there are still 2 more left on my list, so let's go. Number 2! Now, of course, you can't do a Doctor Who villains list without mentioning the Daleks, but let's just stop and think for a minute. While the Daleks are great as their own villain force, let's just remember here that they were not naturally created. Someone created them. And whoever did that had to have been the most sick and vile, consorted, disturbed person ever. Enter Davros.
Welcome to my new empire.
Yes, the Daleks are fantastic as their own villain force, but we still have to consider their original creator here, the one and only Davros, who, by default, basically makes him greater than his own creations. Although the Daleks have had the occasional tendency to want to keep overthrowing him, but much like the Cybermen, Davros keeps coming back, and even though he has been overthrown several times, his creations still owe their lives to him, and without him they wouldn't even have an inch of their strategic planning and forcefulness. Davros was born on Skaro, and during his youth he was drafted into the war between that of his own race, the Khalids, and the other native race of Skaro called the Thals, and after an incident that left him without his eyes, his right hand, and the ability to walk, he became an isolated creature from the rest of the Khalid society, but was still helping to engineer the march of progress in the war through his scientific genius, and eventually helped create genetically engineered soldiers, partially in his own image, the infamous Daleks, programmed to destroy anything not Dalek. Which unfortunately meant him too. But despite his horribly ironic fate, he then survived, and since then has been a constant thorn in the side of the Time Lords and the Doctor himself ever since. Commanding most of the Daleks in the Dalek Civil War, the entire Dalek fleet in the Time War, and even coming up with a plan to destroy all of reality by using planets as an energy source. Davros stands above the Daleks in both command and character, from being as ruthless and evil as they are, being capable of imagining fantastic and horrific capabilities and creations, being gleefully manic and malicious, and being mentally better than everyone around him, and clearly knowing it. Davros is basically the equivalent of the snooty stuck-up kid at a school. You hate him, but at the end of the day, he's still better than you at what he did. He's also, again, an interesting counterpart to the Doctor in that he's close to being as smart as him, but uses his knowledge in the complete opposite way, and will often call the Doctor's life choices and methodology into question with legitimately thought-provoking conclusions. In short, while Davros is absent from the main series for the most part, his legacy lives on in his creations and horrifying creatures that he's spread out amongst creation, and only the Dalek Emperor and the Cult of Skaro have even come close to reaching his power and charisma. Now, before we move on to the ultimate number 1, a couple of honourable mentions. The Great Intelligence, the Vashta Narada, the SiIurians, the Ice Warriors, the Warlords, the Dream Lord, the Autons, Banes, Wood, and common sense.
You lured me in with your cold grey eyes, your simple smile, your bewitching lies. One and one and
Number 1.
my bad, bad angel, the devil and me.
Now, of course, we all have to ponder the question, who can top all of those guys? Well, with that, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. Who is the ultimate? Who always comes back? Who keeps coming back and always has been a thorn in the side of the Doctor? And who has known the Doctor longer than any other villain in the entirety of the Doctor Who legacy? That's right. It's the Master. I couldn't do it. No matter how much I thought of try and come up with a more obscure or clever placement, I couldn't think of anyone more so than the Time Lord, who has constantly fought his way past the Doctor to near victory every time he's appeared. Show, audio, comic, novel, whatever, he's always been there and he's always been awesome. Again, for the hermits who don't know, the Master was an old childhood friend of the Doctor on Gallifrey, who, sadly, after his initiation to the Time Academy, went mad and dedicated his life to his own superiority and destructive nature across the entire universe. On paper, the Master can basically sound as if he's basically the Doctor Who equivalent of General Zod from Superman. And while in some respects that's technically true, there are a few little irregularities here and there that make him, in my opinion, more interesting than Zod. The obvious being that he can regenerate, giving him various forms and personalities across his career, whether it be from the suave, sophisticated Roger Delgado or Anthony Ainley, the regenerating degenerate crispy Time Lord of Peter Pratt or Jeffrey Beavers, the T-1000 rip-off Eric Roberts, or the maniac Joker-like John Sim, the Master has always been his own variety of constant madness and sadism. Some would suggest that the other Time Lord villain Rassilon deserves to be here rather than the Master, since he's technically responsible for making the Master who he is. And while that is technically true, the Master has appeared more times and has done a lot more than Rassilon, despite his moments, ever did. And he hasn't even got an ounce of charisma or memorability that the Master does. Plus, let's not forget that the Master did defeat him at one point. The other great thing about the Master, unlike many villains in Doctor Who, or other villains in general, is that he rarely considers anything beneath him. He's willing to partner with anyone, make any compromise, or do anything to gain conquest, and then will completely disregard them as if they were nothing as soon as he's done so. Hell, he teamed up with Adam in Prisoners of Time, despite hating humans, just so that he could get close to the Doctor and get his revenge. That's how much of a brilliant chess master the man is. But beyond that, he's just a legitimately interesting character to keep watching again. He has all of the generic elements of conquest and superiority, but the fact that he's probably one of the most persistent villains of all time, hell, he pretty much dies almost every time he appears, and every time it basically means nothing to him. Death at this point is basically just an enforced holiday that's over before he knows it. He's fantastically smart and comes up with insane plans like setting up organisations to manipulate human behaviour, becoming Prime Minister of Britain and using the human race to end the universe's timeline and kill them all in the past, raising the dead, gaining several kinds of power that have devastated entire planets, masterfully disguising himself and tricking races that can read minds, and cloning his mind and face across the entire human race, and way more than I can even think of. And whether the Doctor truly considers him a villain of his or not, we will always see him as that. He will always be around to cause strife and is capable of doing things that even villains outside of Doctor Who look upon him with jealousy. The Master. The Master of being a pain in the arse for the Doctor. And that was my top 13 Doctor Who villains list. I hope you enjoyed this list, and if you feel that I left any out, or if you have any conflicting opinions, then feel free to leave your 2 cents in either the comment section below or on the Facebook group, link in the description. And so with that, I bid you allons-y, and I'll see you again soon. Even more so to the point that in some of the first initial appearances, even when a camera wasn't looking at an angel, fucking bugger the fuck shit! For I said camera again. When a camera, Davros always keeps coming back, and despite the fact that his creatures feel a need to overthrow him, I nearly had it. Why?